Hi everybody, my name is Emily Vivian and I am the Technical Manager for this session from the Agriculture, Nutrition Health Academy. And this session today is on Nova's screener of ultra-processed foods. So we're looking at a new tool to monitor and benchmark population diet quality. So thank you all so much for taking part in ANH 2022 and hopefully we'll have a really nice, robust and interactive session. So thank you so much everyone, and over to you, Neha and team.
Thanks very much, Emily. Hello and welcome everyone to the side event on the Nova Ultra Processed Food Screener. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a very packed session lined up for you that consists of a series of presentations to highlight work from our collaborative IMANA-funded project. The goal of this session is to introduce you to the Nova Ultra Processed Food Screener and share with you methodological insights from its development and validation in Brazil, India, Senegal, and Ecuador. And joining us from India, Brazil, Senegal, Ecuador, and Spain, we have our wonderful colleagues and collaborators who I'd like to just briefly acknowledge before we start. From Sheikh Anta Diop University of Senegal, we have Professor Adama Diop, Dr. Saliu Pape Maduo. From the Public Health Foundation of India, we have Dr. Suparna Ghosh Jarath, Minu Singh, Gorika Kumar, Inderdeep Kaur, Shukrani Shinde. From the Universidad San Francisco de Quito in Ecuador, we have Professor Wilma Freire and Drs. Eliza Jimenez and Felipe Belmont. And from the University of São Paulo in Brazil, we have Professor Carlos Monteiro, Drs. Maria Laura Luzada, Caroline Costa, Eurydice Martinez Steele, and Fernanda Mojopos. And I'm Neha Kanpur. I'm also part of the University of São Paulo and Wageningen University. And as I mentioned, we have a lot to cover today, including really to get through the goal of our screener and insights from all of these amazing contexts and the work that they have done. This work was all supported by the IMANA grant. And our session today is organized as 6 presentations. If we move one slide ahead, you'll see what these are. They're really what all of our speakers are going to, briefly talk about these various topics. And at the end of the session, we have time for questions from the audience and also a discussion. But please feel free to send in your questions at any point during this presentation. Just use the chat function or the Q&A function, which I don't think is available. Just the chat function should be fine. If there is nothing else that my colleagues would like to add, then let's get started with our very first presentation of the session, which is on the description and rationale of the Nova Ultra Processed Food Screener. And to give this presentation, we have Dr. Maria Laura Lozada with us, who is an assistant professor at the School of Public Health, University of São Paulo, Brazil. She is also a researcher at the Center for Epidemiological Research in Nutrition and Health. Her research interests lie in the study of ultra-processing of foods and their effects on health and populations. And Dr. Lozada was really part of the initial team of people who conceptualized the term ultra-processed and has published extensively on this topic. So she is the best person to give this presentation. So I'm going to stop now. Welcome, Maria, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emily and Neha, for this beautiful presentation. I'm really happy to be here in this event and talk to you. So I will use my 5 to 7 minutes to talk a little bit about evidence on ultra-processed foods and the rationale on the Brazilian screener. So today, more or less 12 years after the publication of the first paper that proposed the Nova food classification system and that also defined the concept of ultra-processed foods, there is a solid evidence about the negative effects of these foods. And this can be seen in these 13 systematic reviews that you can see in the slide. And more than half of them also with meta-analysis showing a direct association between the consumption of ultra-processed foods and many chronic diseases such as obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases. So in this meta-analysis of cohort studies, for example, you can see that the high consumption of ultra-processed foods was associated with a 50% increased risk of cardiovascular disease mortality, and the same study showed also a 21% higher risk of all-cause mortality related to the high consumption of this food. Ultra-processed foods, as I said before, are defined within the Nova classification system, which groups foods according to the extent and purpose of industrial processing. So they are ready-to-eat industrial formulations, typically made from many ingredients, and processes that enable the production of ultra-processed foods include fractioning of whole foods into substances such as sugars, oils, and fats, chemical modification of these substances, combination of modified and non-modified food substances, and also the use of many cosmetic additives and also sophisticated packing. And studies carried out with food consumption data from 14 countries that are summarizing these meta-analyses that you can see in the slide have already shown that the consumption of ultra-processed food is systematically associated with the deterioration of the nutritional dietary quality. And the processes and ingredients used in the production of ultra-processed foods are designed to create highly profitable, convenient, and hyper-palatable products. And most of the time, they are sold as snacks, drinks, or ready-to-eat meals in large portion sizes, and also promoted through aggressive marketing strategy. And they also induce the replacement of healthy meals based on fresh or minimally processed foods, induce binge eating, and consequently, many metabolic alterations and also modifications in the physiology of these site control systems. Despite all these advances that I have already shown, despite all these advances in science, a major challenge still exists. This is because a very common limitation of all these studies refers to the instruments for assessing food consumption, which have been investigated mostly through non-specific questionnaires to estimate the intake of ultra-processed foods. So large gaps persist in nutritional epidemiology regarding instruments for assessing food consumption according to the Nova food classification in different contexts. It is really relevant, for example, the existence of short instruments that we call screeners for using in large national surveys or also in surveillance systems, which require data collection with less complexity and also using less time. So this is the rationale for the development of the Nova score for the consumption of ultra-processed foods that I will talk a little bit. So the Nova score, or the number of groups of ultra-processed foods consumed during the previous 24 hours, is calculated with the application of the Nova screener, and it was designed to be a proxy of the actual dietary share of ultra-processed food. And the Nova screener developed for the Brazilian population includes ultra-processed foods with greater participation in the daily energy intake, and it was estimated using our National Food Consumption Survey that was conducted in Brazil in 2008-2009 and was discussed with experts from the University of São Paulo. So you can see in the slides the print of our screener presenting a list of 23 groups of ultra-processed foods, and the screener was developed to be responded with clicks of a mouse or with touches on the screen of cell phones or tablets, or even using the computer by the participants of the research, by the individuals. Our last validation study was conducted in the Nutrinet Brazil cohort study. So in this study, participants answered to the Nova screening, checking all items within the list. And they also answered a 24-hour recall where participants informed all foods and the amount they had consumed in the day before. And the performance of the Nova score was evaluating, comparing it to the actual dietary share of ultra-processed foods that was estimated using the 24-hour recall. So in this population, the population of the NutriNet cohort study, scores ranged from 0 to 15, but you can see in this figure that 0, 1, 2, and 3 were the most common, and only 13% consumed 4 items or more. And this first figure in your right shows, as expected, a linear association between the dietary share of ultra-processed foods and the Nova score. In other words, the mean percentage of the dietary share of ultra-processed foods that was calculated based on the 24-hour recall increases linearly and significantly with the increase in the Nova score. And the Nova score does not evaluate the healthy part of the diet, but you can see in the second figure in your left that it presents an inverse relationship with the consumption of fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, and nuts, the set of these healthy foods taken together. In conclusion, we can say that the Nova score that is obtained in a quick and practical manner using an electronic self-report questionnaire showed in our validation analysis a good potential in reflecting the dietary share of this food group in Brazil. So an easy tool to evaluate and monitor diet quality. And although it was designed to evaluate Brazilian adults, the Nova score can be applied in other countries, but about that, Carol and our colleagues from Senegal, Ecuador, and India will talk more. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Maria. For our next presentation, great. We now have Dr. Caroline Costa, who's going to be talking to us about the potential uses of the Nova-UPF screener and present a methodological overview of how this could be developed for other contexts. Dr. Caroline Costa is a postdoctoral fellow in nutritional epidemiology at the University of São Paulo in Brazil. She studies the consumption of ultra-processed foods and their effects on health and has done a lot of work on instrument development. She's currently leading various validation studies of this short instrument that can then be incorporated into various monitoring and evaluation systems. So Dr. Costa previously also served as a substitute professor at the Faculty of Nutrition in the Federal University of Pelotas in Brazil. Welcome, Carol. The floor is yours.
And thank you so much for the introduction, Neha. So I'm going to follow Maria's presentation, talking about the main uses of the tool in Brazil, and then presenting a step-by-step proposal of protocol for adapting and validating the tool for other countries or contexts. Since our group have proposed to use easy and quick screeners to evaluate and monitor the consumption of ultra-processed foods, the national surveys in Brazil have implemented these tools. Firstly, in the Vigitel study, which is a study that monitors NCD's risk factors in the adult population through telephone interviews since 2006. The tool was firstly implemented in this study in 2019. We are already able to identify an increasing time trend in the consumption of UPF using the Nova-UPF score until now, and this trend follows the increasing trend of the obesity prevalence in Brazil. The tool has also been used in the Brazilian school-based adolescent health survey and in the population-based household adult health survey. And besides our validation studies in adults, some independent studies have been developed by partners from other institutions in Brazil to adapt and validate the screener also for other populations, so including children, adolescents, and also older adults. For contextualization, the tool firstly proposed and validated in Brazil is now under adaptation and validation also for other countries. So Ecuador, India, and Senegal represent the 3 countries involved in the IMANA project, but we were also approached by other researchers from the Pacific Islands, Portugal, and Slovakia, who asked us for validating the tool to their contexts. Considering that, we realized that it could be useful to share with you, with our audience today, a suggestive protocol or to list some important steps in case you would like to develop an adaptation and validation of the tool in your context. We firstly proposed this protocol to our partners of the IMANA project, and I would like to highlight that these steps and this protocol is a suggestion and not a recommendation, considering that following or not these steps will depend on the context of the country. So also you will see soon the in-country specificities in the insights from each partner. So the first step we suggest is to develop a literal translation of the tool to the appropriate languages based on the Portuguese and English versions that we already published. So this step is essential to start the determination of we call as content validity. The next step we suggest is to look at population-based studies or other surveys developed in your countries that investigated the consumption of ultra-processed foods. So you then could check the appropriateness of the 23 UPF items that we have proposed in Brazil. I mean, you can think about, do the items represent the same most consumed ultra-processed foods in your countries, for example, or there are another missing subgroup which is essential to be present in the, or does not make sense to have some subgroup there. So about the selection of appropriate context-specific examples within each UPF category, we suggest looking, for example, at national dietary intake or purchase surveys, or even regional surveys and Euromonitor data to help in this identification. But of course, in case there are no studies or surveys in the country, looking for studies in neighboring countries could be an option to help in this stage. So with the access to surveys or other data, the idea is to choose 2 or 3 brand examples within UPF categories that you think could be easily recognized by your population, for example. Here we have an example for the tool in Brazil. This brand is the first occurrence for powder juice when searching the web. Which is in fact the most remembered brand by our population, the one we have used as an example for this item in our tool. So here is just important to highlight that some categories may not need brand examples, as regular or diet soda, for example, because it's easily recognized without a brand. But you can also evaluate this necessity panel of experts. In this step, you will have 23 UPF items or so, and a list of respective examples to be evaluated for appropriateness by the expert panel. So based on the literature on the methodology we proposed, it takes about 15 experts in the fields of public health nutrition, epidemiology, or others. Then you will identify and invite those you think are eligible, and they will be responsible for the determination of the content validity of the tool. So for the expert panel, one option could be sending an online survey, for example, to the experts to obtain input, specifically on the list of items and brand examples. You could use, for example, the Delphi methodology, a way to have a standardized decision-making between countries. In this survey, this Delphi methodology, each UPF item could be presented alone, for example, powdered drink mix, followed by 2 or 3 other ways, including the most popular brands. So in the first round, experts assign grades from 1 to 10, for example, for each manner presented, and provide reasons justifying their grades. Then in a second round, you can provide to the experts an anonymized summary of their forecasts and reasons in case of no consensus in the first round. Finally, you can organize a virtual panel discussion in case no consensus is reached. Here we have just an example of what we proposed with the item alone, and the item with an example and the empty field to fill in the reasons of the assigned grade. After these steps, you can make further adjustments and revisions based on the panel, and this is the final stage to determine the content validity. And finally, you can test the face validity of the tool with a purposed sample, who will fill in the questionnaire without any help, and provide input on clarity and ease of understanding, interpreting, and responding to the tool. Finally, after these inputs, we suggest you finalize the context-specific instruments and report on the methodology applied. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that overview, Carol. Next, we have Dr. Suparna Ghosh Jairath, who's going to talk about the methodological insights on the development of the Nova-UPF screener from her work in India. Dr. Ghosh Jairath is the head of community nutrition at the Indian Institute of Public Health, Delhi, part of the Public Health Foundation of India. She is also an intermediate research fellow with the Wellcome Trust DBT India Alliance. Dr. Ghosh Jairath has extensive experience as a clinical and research nutritionist and has served as a consultant to the Planning Commission of India and as an expert member of the Steering Committee of Madhya Pradesh. She's leading work on the dietary diversity and nutritive value of indigenous foods in addressing food insecurity and nutritional status of vulnerable tribal communities in India. And she is working with us on the Yamana project. So welcome, Suparna. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to hearing more about your work.
Thank you so much, Neha, for this long introduction. Thank you so much. And thank you, Carol and other colleagues at USP. I would also like to thank ANH Academy and our funders, Imana, for organizing this event and providing an excellent platform for us to share our work on adaptation and validation of the Nova-UPF screener for India. So does India need a Nova-UPF screener? Well, the answer is a big yes, and I'll tell you the reason. India's burden of non-communicable disease is increasing, and a rapid nutrition transition is underway in India. This has resulted in traditional diets being increasingly replaced with foods that are high in fats, sugars, salts, and constituents like ultra-processed natural foods, additives, and preservatives. Several of these foods can actually qualify as UPFs. And compared to other low-middle income countries, India has the highest increase in sales of UPFs. And UPFs, as has been reiterated by my colleagues from USP, and we all know that it can contribute to several of the diet-related non-communicable diseases like diabetes, hypertension, etc. So therefore, there is a felt need for a screener that could rapidly assess consumption patterns of UPFs in our Indian population. And in order to estimate the actual consumption of this category of food in our population. So in order to utilize an UPF screener, which is developed in another part of the globe, we decided to adapt the Nova-UPF screener and then validate it for India. The methodology of adaptation, as you can see on your screen, includes 3 stages. And in fact, we have completed most of these stages. And if you can see, the first one included a near exhaustive literature review and online market survey that provided information on the UPF environment of India based on their availability and consumption. This was followed by a free listing of all UPFs that are available in India. The second stage was ranking of these UPFs based on the consumer preferences as reported in the literature and identifying the most preferred UPFs that are consumed in India. Stage 3 involved several rounds of iterations and triangulation of information for developing the subcategories of UPFs in the Indian food environment. So if we now look at the strategy adopted in a bit detail, we can see that in India, the UPFs are not very well defined, and all the studies that have explored the consumption of the listed foods which belong to all the categories of Nova-UPF classification. So what has happened is several of the culinary ingredients, several of the simply processed food are also assessed along with UPFs in these studies. Therefore, there is a need to standardize the definition of UPFs in the Indian context. There is a lack of several Indian studies on UPFs as Nova food classification is still a relatively new concept and needs to be adapted to the Indian food environment. So several proxy names like high fat, salt foods, processed foods, fast foods, junk foods, etc. are being used and consists of UPFs under HFSS, junk foods, fast foods, whereas it is not telling us exclusively about the UPFs. So our online market survey provided some valuable insights on the availability of a wide range of UPFs, which are very typical to the Indian food environment. And then we did a free listing of all these foods. The next step was the saliency mapping. We then calculated the salient scores for each of the UPF subcategory in order to assess the most to least preferred UPFs. The calculation was done by listing the UPF subcategories and ranking them in each of the studies based on their consumption and consumer preferences. Then a reverse ranking was done, and this was followed by calculation of salient scores. And then we had a compiled or a composite salient score for each of the UPF categories, and we could list them in terms of most to least preferred UPFs according to the consumer preference. The last step was triangulation, where we had several rounds of iterations within the Public Health Foundation of India team, as well as the USP team for the subcategories and decision on the subcategories. The fine-tuning and the grouping of the subcategories were done based on that. And finally, we had a draft Nova-UPF screener, which you can see on your screen. So here I would like to reiterate on certain points, like we followed several conventions. Since, as I said, we did not have a standardized definition of UPF, we had to first decide on certain conventions based on the literature as well as the FAO document on the Nova food classification. So a careful review of the traditional foods were done, and we also looked at the functionality of these foods. So by functionality, I mean to say, what is the purpose of having a particular kind of snack? And we did not actually look at the nutrient content of those foods. Then the second step was looking at the level of preparation of these foods. That is, how much of pre-preparation is needed. Like if we are having a ready-to-eat food, we put it as one category, ready-to-cook food, putting it as another category. We did a careful assessment of all the labels that were available. And looking at the labels, we looked at the UPF constituents, the level of packaging and processing. And one important thing which we considered was that we did not differentiate between a product which is healthy versus a product which is unhealthy. So then we also looked at some more conventions like the traditional Indian foods. We did a careful review of the traditional foods and those foods which are at some stage of transition, like some brands are ultra processed while the others are not, we excluded them from the list. And it is important at this point to understand that the list of UPFs in the screener needs to be reviewed every 5 to 10 years, and new foods which are continuously being developed and many of them may find place in the UPF screener need to be considered. So we also, then the next point was that we did not consider the brand names, as has already been pointed out. So the brand names we did not consider because of several other regulatory reasons and all. And this list was a representative list with few examples with regional representation of these foods. Because India is a vast country with regional representation of the different kinds of foods that are being consumed. So making an exhaustive list of such exhaustive kind of UPFs in the country would not be feasible to administer, and hence we went for representation with regional examples coming up. So the list that was prepared was a representative list, but not a comprehensive list of all UPFs in the Indian market. The next step was the validation of the Nova-UPF screener for India. This included 3 steps, as has already been pointed out by Carol. So in the content validation, we had regional and the national consultations conducted. As I said, we have got different geographical areas. So we conducted regional consultations, 6 regional consultations were conducted, and each regional consultation had 10 people representing expertise from nutrition, public health, nutrition, food technology, etc. So we had to deviate from the original protocol, understanding the vastness of the cultural foods that are being consumed and that have been converted to UPFs in our country. The screener was then decided upon the subcategories and the examples that need to be fitted into each category. And we are planning to do a quantitative content validation using relevance scale now. Based on the regional consultation, the screener was modified and a face validation was conducted on 50 adults. And this was a purposefully selected sample of 50 adults, again representative of the different geographical areas in the country. Specific food items were modified in the 4 subcategories after the face validation also. The final stage will be the concurrent criterion validation, where the screener will be validated against a 24-hour dietary recall. And that has already been pointed out by Carol, the 24-hour dietary recall is the gold standard which will be considered here. We are working on our 24-hour recall kit. We have decided on a sample size of 300, and we have 3 study sites from diverse geographical and socio-demographical areas. So this is the final phase of our screener, where we have 3 subcategories. Subcategory A has all the beverages. So this category has 4 subcategories or 4 screens which are present. So if you can see, we have a pictorial representation also. And each subcategory has a list of food, the name specified along with the representative pictures. Similarly, B category has all the ready-to-eat foods, and the C category has all the ready-to-cook foods. B category has 14 subcategories and C has 6 categories. So if you can see, we had to go beyond the 23 listed categories and had to make the screener adapted to the Indian food environment. This is how our 24-hour dietary recall kit looks. So I need to highlight some of the challenges that we faced while adapting and validating this screener. Number 1 is the context. The context required a more extensive set of examples of India-specific foods in addition to those which are already identified in the literature. So our market survey really helped us. The formative data collection was perhaps a bit restricted to online market survey, and virtual consultation were conducted for adaptation owing to the COVID-19 related restrictions. The regional diversity in foods resulted in a very exhaustive list of UPF foods, and shortening the list was a task on its own, as we had to keep the representativeness of the tool with appropriate examples to make the tool applicable for a pan-India national survey. And we had 8 rounds of modifications of the screener to finally arrive at the final prototype, which can be now tested for criterion validation. So in my last slide, I would like to give some key messages for which the first message is regarding the language. So we thought that English and Hindi are the 2 languages which will be useful for a pan-India survey, but we feel that regional languages are equally important. We had to use a pictorial screener for better comprehension. The screener has to be administered by a well-trained interviewer because we understand the issue around the differential literacy rate in the country. So even administration of the tool, self-administration of the tool could be a challenge if we are conducting it as a part of the national survey across different geographies and socioeconomic status. And last but not the least, an exhaustive training module, a manual of procedures with exhaustive list of examples need to be given to make our trainers understand, to make our trainees or the interviewers understand the vastness of these kind of foods that are available in the Indian food environment, and ask the right question and allow the participant to comprehend better the tool when it is being administered. With this, I will finish my presentation. Over to you, Neha. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So over to our next presenter, and our next presenter is Professor Adama Diop. She is a professor of food and human nutrition and a senior researcher at the Faculty of Science and Technology of the Sheikh Anta Diop University of Dakar in Senegal. Her research priorities have focused on public policy, food systems, and environment in Senegal and the West African region. Professor Diop has extensive experience working as a nutrition expert and a consultant for several regional, international organizations, and is a member of several scientific and technical committees. Welcome to this session, Professor Diop. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much, Neha. I would like first to thank very well Professor Carlos Monteiro from the University of Sao Paulo, Brasilia, and all the team to involve us in this exciting research project. And would like also to thank all the LARNA team, my laboratory, for their involvement in the implementation of the project. And I take also this opportunity to thank very well the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine for the funding of this project through the IMANA grant. It is my pleasure to share with you the adaptation process of the Nova-UPF tool in Senegal. And Senegal is a French-speaking country located in West African region with over 17 million inhabitants, and where 43% of the population is living in urban area. And in our country, the most widely spoken local language is Wolof. And 80% of the population speaks this local language. Regarding the implementation of the project in our context, it was implementing during the COVID context, and all the meeting related to the adaptation, to the implementation of the project globally was done in online, but some activities was done in the field with respect to the barrier measure. Senegal, like other low and middle income countries, is faces with multiple consequences of the nutrition transition, including undernutrition, micronutrition deficiencies, as well as overweight and obesity, and emergency of diet-related non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, cancer, etc. And according to the national statistic, NCDs, specifically overweight, obesity, affects 15.8% of the adults, obesity 6.4% of the adults, and hypertension affects 29.8% of this population. Diabetes type 2, 2.1%, and hypercholesterolemia 19.2%. This situation is probably linked with the nutritional transition that I say, and which is characterized by a change in eating habits with a diet with a consumption of high in saturated fat, fat-free sugar, salt, food additive, and exacerbated by a sedentary lifestyle of the population. And many evidence highlight the negative effect of ultra-processed food consumption on the quality of diets, and its impact on a range of NCDs. And in this context, sure, there is a need to have a monitoring tool to capture ultra-processed food consumption in our population. So through this project, Senegal have the opportunity to use the Nova tool, but in the first time we have to adapt this tool in our context. The slide you see shows the overview of this process, this adaptation process, done in several steps, the translation of the tool, the literature research, the contact with case stakeholder, the market survey, the fast validity, and all these steps are lead result of the adaptation of the tool. So this is the different step of the adaptation process. First of all, we translate the tool, which is originally in English. We translate it into French. Because in Senegal, the working language is French, even if the spoken language is Wolof. So after that, we have done a literature research to see the data of the appropriate category of ultra-processed foods consumed or available in our context. And these literature research have allowed us to see that we have a lack of data on this kind of information. Senegalese have not, in the beginning of the project, has not a food consumption survey, and Senegal is not in the Euromonitor report, so that it was really difficult to get the specific items of each category in our context. And the third step of the adaptation with the contact of the case stakeholder. We are implementing the committee, the national committee, who provides their expertise to the adaptation of this tool, and we contact all stakeholders from the Ministry of Health, of the University and Research Institute, the NGO, and the professional in the food industry. So we first of all organized a first workshop with 20 experts from all these fields I mentioned. And after that, we present to these experts the original tool, or AP-Food tool, Nova-UPF tool. And through this workshop, we have several discussions with the expert to see what is the best way to adapt the Nova-UPF tool content in our context. In addition to this first workshop, we have done some individual consultation with the expert and to have in-depth discussion with them to better adapt the tool. One of the recommendations of the expert was to see how is the best way to identify the category available in our context, and that's why we conduct a market survey in Dakar, in the two biggest supermarkets, and this survey allows us to identify and to categorize the food available in our supermarket in our context using the Nova classification. Over 4,500 different food packages were recorded, and we classified all these food according to Nova classification. After that, when we get an overview of the different category of UPF available in our context, we integrate it in the tool, and a second round was organized with the same expert, and we present the adapted content of the tool. We get direct input from experts about the proposed content, and we have the innovation in Senegal with also the illustration of the inclusion of illustrative image of brand and a brief description of each category in the tool, in the tablet, and the final content was finally adapted for this tool. Now, after that, we organized the face validity of the tool. And for the face validity test, we target 25 adults over 18 years old. And through these tests, we appreciate the tool in two levels. The first level is from the interviewer to see if the interviewer have difficulty to make himself understood, to see if the respondent don't have difficulty in answering the question. And in the from the interviewer, we try to have an appreciation of the meaning of each categories, to see if the categories correspond with product they are usually exposed to, and to see if the example of food is clear for the interviewer. After that, this test validity, I just like to mention that this test validity was done by 4 nutritionists, and these nutritionists was trained on the Nova tool, and the face validity test enable us to reformulate some categories to increase the number of product examples, because in the original tool it was just 3. It was recommended to have 3 examples of product in each category. But in our side, we increase the number of product example to allow the respondent to better respond to the question. And after that, we harmonize the way that Nova tool is administered, so that we have done an standardized. We standardize all the interviewer how to apply the Nova tool in our context. And after this step, the validation of the Nova tool against the 20-hour recall method was done. And it is ongoing, and actually we have applied the Nova-UPF screen to a convenience sample of 300 adults in Dakar. We have also done in this same sample the 20-hour recall, and we have just a first passage with 300 adults, and a second passage was done in 30% of this total sample. And all the food was quantified using scale, dried millet, modeled clay, and water. And now we are, the analysis for the validation is ongoing. We will have soon the first result of this validation. And in Senegal, the key challenge was the training to understand Nova classification and the concept of ultra processing. It was really a challenge for us to do that. And the other challenge is to maintain a good balance in forming categories in the Nova-UPF tool with respect to logic and composition, use and energy value, to design the content in French and administrate it to the participant in our local language. It was also a really important step of the adaptation of this tool, to integrate illustrative image of product in tablets in the electronic version. And really the challenge is also to involve the key nutrition stakeholder in all the steps of this project to facilitate later the surveillance or the monitoring of the evaluation of the consumption of ultra-processed food in Senegal. Thank you very much for your listening. I am available with the team to respond to any question regarding the adaptation of the UPF tool in Senegal.
Thanks very much, Adama. We have a couple more quick presentations waiting for you. Our next presenter is Professor Wilma Freri, who is an emeritus professor at the Universidad San Francisco de Quito in Ecuador. Prior to this, she was a research professor at the same university, and her very impressive career has spanned multiple roles, including serving as the regional coordinator of the Food and Nutrition Program at the Pan American Health Organization and as the director of 4 national nutrition surveys for Ecuador. Professor Freri, we leave the floor open to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much, and hello to everybody. Well, I will talk a little bit about Ecuador. Ecuador is a quite small country with 17 million individuals, the population more or less, and 283,000 square kilometers in the middle of the Americas. So we are divided north to the north and to the south. We have a problem of overweight and obesity. In the survey that we implemented in 2014, we found that children between 5 and 11 years presented 26% of overweight and obesity. And we also found that in adult population, 60% of men and women was overweight or has obesity. So this was a problem that has been identified only in that survey performed in 2014, for which the idea of looking at the problem of malnutrition really demanded from the community to start thinking that also, unfortunately, we have not been able to decrease the prevalence of undernutrition. We have to add them up the problem of overweight and obesity. When we were going to start this study, to everybody in the world, including Ecuador, COVID showed up. And that forced us to replan all our field work that was already going on in order to see whether we can implement the study or not. So we decided that the only way we can go ahead is to do an interview by internet using Zoom, and which will allow us to continue with the several steps already in place. In addition to that, I would like to mention that we have been working with Nova classification way before, 3 or 4 years ago, in fact, when we have access to the food balance, composition tables in Ecuador, which was used in the national survey in 2014, we decided to classify all the table based on Nova classification. That was really very important. And we also used that information for this present study. The first step, what we went, as everybody else, is to review the literature, and then we proceed with the adaptation of the Nova tool. Brazil provides us with a tool with 24 categories, and after review the information available from the national survey in Ecuador and doing some analysis, we come out with 27 categories. We also review the 24 hours dietary recall, which after testing and retesting, we come out with this design that you have in there. And well, this is the consent report that we have to approve by the Committee of Ethics in Ecuador, in the university. And then we also have to prepare, because the survey was going to do by Zoom, we also have to prepare a food atlas. And in order for using during the interview, this food atlas was prepared based on 2 food atlas done before. But in addition to that, we collect pictures from the ultra-processed food that was available in the web. As you see, these examples, these atlas have identified a code for every single item in 4 portions that was collected, this size of the portions was collected from the 24 hours dietary record, and also the items that you see in there. Well, once we have the questionnaires, we designed an electronic version with 3 pages. You have the consent in the first part, identification of the interview, the date of when we applied the survey, and then the tool and the 24 hours dietary record. We also prepare a manual to train the people who were going to perform the interviews in order to standardize the methodology of data collection. For the validity phase, we select 10 subjects, 5 men and 5 women, 18 years and older. And with them, we apply the instruments, and further, we also work with 2 nutritionists, one familiar with the Nova classification and the other one without the training in Nova. And this information provides to us sufficient data to do the final design of the instruments, as also to make sure that the people who were going to do the interview were very carefully trained in Nova classification. For us, that we have been working with Nova, when you read the first time, the classification is so obvious and so clear that seems that it's easy to apply, but it's not easy. So that is why we were very careful in retraining the nutritionists in order to standardize the procedure. But also this phase helped us to do the final adjustment of the instruments and the manuals. The next step was, the 2 nutritionists were trained and standardized, and then we went to collect for the convenience samples of 3 adults. COVID definitely put us in the situation of changing the original plan. We were thinking in inviting people at the health center to participate in the study, but that was impossible. So we ended up with working with the employees in a call center company to invite them to participate, and if they accept, to continue with the interview. This provide us the facility of having access to the participants. Nevertheless, it was also very important to consider the fact that even though the sample was a convenience sample, these people definitely were very clear characteristics that cannot be the same in other groups of population. I will comment at the end about that. In the participants, the first thing they did, the participants, was to respond to the Nova-UPF and then to 24 hours dietary recall. Every time the interview was performed, there was a phase of data revision and cleaning before it went to the database. And finally, entered to the phase of statistical analysis, where also another previous activity of cleaning was performed. Final considerations that I would like to share with you, and I think it goes along with all the colleagues that I have been hearing. We have to adjust the questionnaires according to the reality of every place. We have countries as Ecuador that has previous 24 hours recall, and that is a very valuable instruments to help us not to go to the field to try to identify the items, because we already in the 24-hour recall have this information. We plan very carefully pre-implementation and implementation field work, particularly when we were forced to change because of COVID. We did the validation of the questionnaires in a very careful manner in order to make sure that data will be collected accordingly to what was expected. For us, the definition of the convenience sample, after going around in how we are going to do, we end up with this group of individuals that work with a company. But it was a fantastic lesson to us because it tells us that if we want to implement, or anyone wants to implement in other populations, we do have to follow these steps before we implement the tool. And the advantage for the country that we have a 24 hours dietary record survey that was performed in 20,000 individuals help us to identify already the ultra-processed food. We were very familiar with the classification, and also we learned from reviewing this information that the tool can be implemented in the ongoing, on the regular basis, surveys that are collecting information in the countries. In Ecuador, there are several surveys that take place every 2 or 3 years that collect data either in expenditure or consumption. And if there is the case, the tool can also be utilized in this context. So that is what we come out with, the recommendations that we made, that previously going into another survey, look what is available in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wilma. I know we have about 2.5 minutes left, so I am going to try and summarize the session as quickly as I possibly can, which is really just to highlight, the depth and breadth of work that has been done in the development of this Nova-UPF screener in all of these 3 contexts, but also to just, the fantastic presentations that were made by our previous speakers and collaborators have really just highlighted how flexible the development protocol is to context-specific reality is, so whether it's the COVID situational factors or the needs of the particular context, our team and collaborators have really adapted to using different methods, whether it was conducting lit reviews and online market surveys in India, or workshops and individual expert consultants with key stakeholders in Senegal, or in Ecuador, where the team was more familiar with the concept of ultra-processed foods. They used that in-house experience to their advantage to, move the development of the UPF screener along. And also, I think these presentations have highlighted how these multiplicities in methodologies can actually be used to our advantage. You'll see that while there were variations in the various methods of development of this tool, the final screener is quite similar across all of these contexts. So all you see in the screen in front of you are excerpts from just the beverages section across all of these countries that have been translated to English. The data, they may not map immediately, but we're looking at about the same kinds of products, because that is what ultra-processed foods are. They're globalized and they're very similar across different contexts. And I think this might be the last. Oh, I'm sorry. So just go over these. I don't think we have time, but the audience has seen how the presentation kind of varies, despite there being some standardization in the items that the screener has. And our very last slide is just to say that our next steps and our next presentation really will be on the data collection and analysis. So for next year, please join us for a presentation on the results in the subsequent ANH Academy weeks. Thank you all very, very much, speakers and everybody else. Do we want to just quickly go over 10 seconds each? India, Ecuador, Senegal, would you like to tell us what you think you will do with this tool once you finish validating it? You have like 5 seconds to respond. India?
Well, this tool, the National Institute of Nutrition has shown a lot of interest in adopting the tool for a national survey. So we are working towards that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Ecuador?
Well, we definitely have, in talking with colleagues here, have found a lot of interest in using the tool. And in fact, one of the universities already has been discussing with us about that. But if we really want to have a wider use, I would say that one of the things that we have to do is to talk at the political level to implement the tool in the already going on surveys. There are many surveys. For example, we saw one survey promoted by PAHO, Pan American Health Organization, in which the inclusion of this instrument would definitely improve the quality of the information they collect.
Thank you, Wilma. I'm so sorry, I'm going to cut you off, but Senegal, would you like to also? Adama?
Thank you very much. I think that in our side, we plan to integrate the tool in the STEP survey, which is the national survey which target NCDs, overweight and obesity, as well as NCDs in the Senegalese population. We are in touch with the division of disease, and I think that it can be done to better monitoring the consumption of ultra processed food in Senegal.
Great. Thank you all very much. I'm so sorry I have to cut everyone short. We're over time, but fabulous presentations. Thank you so much for all of your hard work. We're so excited to see all of these products, and to the audience members. Thank you so much for staying with us to the very end of this much delayed presentation. We hope to see you next year as well. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.